not heavy with wording. It's not a lot of cross references needed, and there's not a lot of biblical previous study needed. So just want to highlight that for you, the opportunity that's there for you to grab hold of your blessing here. Okay. All right. Let's look at chapter 9. We are going to be in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 9. Last week, we did 8 and 9 as a quick recap. And if you remember, we made it all the way to our question 23, where we were looking at the author's observations for what caused him to see these points regarding wisdom in his life. We spent a lot of time as a bridge between chapter 8 and 9. And then we looked at wisdom being superior to folly. This wisdom, verse 13, I have also seen under the sun, and it seems great to me. There was a little city with few men in it. The great king came against it, besieged it, and built great snares around it. Now there was found in it a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city, yet no one remembered the same poor man. Then I said, wisdom is better than strength. Nevertheless, the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. Words of the wise spoken quietly should be heard, rather than the shout of rulers of fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. And we did a lot of compare and contrast there, if you remember. We looked at it more literary. We did break it down in terms of the verses that we're saying there, but it's almost poetic in the way that it's written. So again, if you have any questions about that, let us know, or you can reference last week's class. Okay, Ecclesiastes chapter 11 and 12. We've been referencing chapter 12, not only at the start of the class, but the last several weeks we kept reading chapter 12, the ending, just to make sure we understand the author's thesis. And that's the important piece to grab hold here, right? This is much like public speaking. It's much like a dissertation. So the reference point for this is based off of biblical understanding, but also scholastic understanding. And I think that that's something that's important and key to note for the author and for the Bible. Again, this is one of those areas where you have commonality and common ground, because there's a lot of practical teaching and understanding here. One of the structural strong points of Ecclesiastes will help you in maybe your biblical studies with individuals who are more literary thinkers, literal thinkers, logistical minds, because this book is very straight to the point in terms of how you would structure any argument, whether you're talking about a legal argument, whether you're talking about public speaking, whether you're talking about high school or college English classes. Meaning the structure here is you're letting the audience know your premise in the beginning. You're letting the audience know your thesis, and everything in between those 2 points is just supporting that conclusion, right? So in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, the word is conclusion. But if you've been to any higher education or you're familiar with this understanding, this concept of thesis can be used, right? And that's something that is important for us to grab hold of too. And when I say important, I think it's something worth flagging, because sometimes we shy away from science and even education when talking about biblical studies, but education and science come from God, right? So these things that people are able to do, all good things come from God. So just be mindful that some of the authors in your Bible have structural points that are much like what we find inside of higher education. And this is one of them. This author here is one very wise, very smart, and the structural points that he's using, which is so fantastic, is much like, again, higher education. So just want to flag that just to look at this and see if there's something that maybe you can grab hold of too, or like we said, use it to your advantage when talking about interacting with individuals maybe in your family or just in your wheelhouse that are more focused on a structural standpoint. Okay, with that being said, the conclusion for this whole matter that we've been looking at this entire time is that each individual person has a responsibility. Remember, we started class talking about this is a book between your God and yourself. So just want to reiterate that multiple times through class today. that this book is about God Almighty and yourself. So with that being said, there's a conclusion to this whole matter according to this author. So all that he's been saying, all the information that he's laid out, the whole conclusion to this matter is very simple, which is fear God, keep his commandments. And then he makes a very strong point that this is the whole duty of mankind. So this is mankind's purpose. Now, this is where, if we started out the class as we had been looking at much of the class, there were a lot of common ground that we were talking about that we would be able to grab hold of anybody in our family or social circle, right? Once we get to chapter 12, verses 13 through 14, this is where we're going to diverge. This is where you're going to have to either believe or unbelieve once you get to this point, which is okay, right? This is much like, again, an argument or in school structure. Everyone is not going to agree. I think if you are on the agreement side in the First Corinthians passage, which talks about the message of the cross is power to those that believe, it's hard to fathom people who don't believe, right? But we have to be mindful that everyone is not going to believe. Everyone is not going to accept. So let's keep that as our focus for this class, right? Let's just present this as an argument and be mindful that everyone may not grab hold of this, right? Which is okay for our presentation purposes, because thankfully, God is not looking for 100% participation in terms of our sharing of the gospel and the reception of it. He's just looking for our participation in the sharing, and he will work on those hearts and minds, right? Meaning we're not required to get a certain amount of people saved before we can be saved. Thank God for that, right? So just keep that in mind. Don't be discouraged by that. It's something that I'm not going to minimize your feelings, because it is discouraging when people, especially loved ones, don't grab hold of what truth that you grab hold to. But in the sake of the context of this class, as summarizing the last few chapters, do not be discouraged by that, because the last few chapters have been very argumentative in a positive way, not argumentative in a combative way. So when you present your argument, your case, you rest, and it's up to the person to receive it, right? So the whole conclusion of life, according to what the author has to say, is to fear God and keep his commandments. Fear obviously is not boohoo scared like Halloween time. Fear is a form of reverence, a form of humility, a trusting and obeying, and respect. That's why the commandments part is in that same connotation, in that same sentence, right? So the whole conclusion of everything, what's the whole matter? This whole book was talking about everyday life, right? Physical things, the things that you do. Does it have any meaning? Short-term, long-term? Solomon says long-term, no. Those things that people do, whether it's good, whether it's bad, what's the purpose of those things? His response to that is the conclusion to that question, and the life that every person will live, no matter if it's a short life or a long life physically, is that the purpose was to fear God and keep his commandments. This is man's duty. Now, duty is a term that's lost in societies all around the world now, unfortunately. Responsibility is also fleeting. For this is man, this is the whole duty of man. This is man's responsibility, according to the author, which is Solomon. For God, and here's why he's supporting this: God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. Now, we referenced these verses for the last several classes, right? But let's present this in a case standpoint. It's very important that he follows up 14 with 13, because his point is, not only is fearing God and keep his commandments man's purpose, the key to or the meaning of life, he gives a reason of why that is. And I think that that's important for us when we're talking to non-believers. Don't rest so much on your belief that you forget in your presentation to explain to people why what you believe is worth believing, right? And notice I didn't say why what you believe is what you believe, right? There's a time and a place for that. But for in today's class, we're not defending why Ellis believes this, right? We're defending why this is believable. And I think if you can think of that in your Bible studies, it makes it less personal, and it's easier to receive when people reject it, right? Because sometimes people will purposely in a Bible study try to make it about you. And it's hard to combat that because we're only speaking where the Bible speaks in silent when the Bible is silent. So if I interject my opinion into the Bible study, the person could hold that against me later on. So these are just some tools and tidbits. So what we're going to do is not really defend on why Ellis believes this. We're going to argue this in a case of why this is believable. Now, why would it be believable that fearing God and keep his commandments is my whole purpose, right? I can't see God, right? Romans tells me I can see his invisible attributes every day. But if I'm a non-believer, I don't believe in God. Why would my purpose be believing in God? I can understand why you feel your purpose may be believing in God if you're a believer. This is where Solomon comes in to say, okay, listen, there's a piece that connects the unbeliever and the believer. And that piece is before and after all. And that's something critical because it's a standard. Now, when you start think of life as a standard, you have some common ground. This is where we draw the unbeliever into the conversation. Again, in your Bible studies, don't miss the point about a standard, because if you forget to emphasize a standard, what people will say is, oh, that's just how your church worships, or that's just how you believe, or that's just how this, or that's just how you interpret it, right? Keep that in mind. We're looking at a standard, right? And a standard is what's critical. Now, standards are also lost in societies all around the world, unfortunately. But we have to bring these things back when you're talking about spiritual things, because a standard means that there is some responsibility that individuals are supposed to be living towards or living up to. And that means it doesn't matter if you're an unbeliever or a believer or a non-believer, we both have the same responsibility to that standard. Now, what is that standard first, before we talk about the responsibility? Because really verse 13 is the responsibility, which is fear God and keep his commandments. But let's look at 14 first, right? What is that standard? Well, God, wait a minute. Why am I have to fear God? Because God is above all. Well, how do I know? Because he's going to bring every work into judgment. Well, how does he know what I'm doing? And here's the important part, including every secret thing. See, so now we see there's a standard of creation, right? And we can go all the way back to Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning was the word, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and the spirit hovered over the waters of the deep. And God said, let there be light. And then John 1:1, in the beginning was the word was with God, the word was God. All things were made through him, and without him, nothing was made, right? So now we see a creation standard, right? On the sixth day, God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness and give him dominion. And he will have a realm to rule over, right? And that realm is earth. And see, these are the things that you have to draw your audience in. If we were studying this in one sitting, it would have been more effective because we would have been presenting this just literally as a case. But time does not always permit that. Think of even in your legal system, some cases go on for weeks or months, right? So in this presentation that we've been doing in our class, now we're at this conclusion that there's a standard. Notice that we're not talking about denominationalism, how you worship, your individual interpretation, your personal belief towards God. We're talking about a standard first, right? In Ecclesiastes, right? Because first I need to get unbelievers and believers in the same wavelength. Later classes and other subject points, we will talk about the difference between belief, right? And we know that there are differences because even demons believe, right? So like belief is tiered, right? So we understand that through Bible study. But if we just stay in this book, Ecclesiastes, we're really trying to get as many people to the believing side as possible. And then through more education, deep dive, we'll explain a greater detail of what type of belief that we need to have based off of God's commandments. So therefore, that standard of creation is a good starting point to go to, because it's also common ground with people that believe in God and believe in creation. They'll say, oh yeah, I believe that too. So it's another way for you to grab some common ground. Keep in mind, this judgment is both good and evil, right? We weight evil, right? We weight the evil judgment, right? Doing these bad things, but the good is being judged too. And we know that really, not only, but we know that as a good place really from Jesus's parable between the sheep and the goats, right? Because some people were doing some good things and some people were doing more good things and some people weren't doing any good things. So like in that parable, he touches on this good and evil judgment. See, so it's not just about evil, every good or evil thing. And it's not just about visible. And that's why he ends with this, right? It's not just about the things that me or you do, that me or you can see. It's also about those secret things that no one can see. Remember at the start of class, this conclusion of this class and this book emphasis will be about you and your God, right? This is a relationship book, a relationship bookend, and a relationship conclusion. You have to think of it that way. So therefore, in a relationship, there's things that people can see in the external for a relationship, no matter what type of human relationship it is. But there's other aspects of the relationship that only the individuals in the relationship are privy to. And that's how Christianity works, right? There's things that people can see that I do good or bad. And there's some things that people can't see good or bad that only God and me see. Now, people may see the after effects of those good or bad things, but God knows all. And that's what we're talking about. So again, standard, right? Don't be uncomfortable by this standard, because what it does is it gives us something to live up to, right? Let's just look at the flip argument to this. If there was no standard, just as an individual, let's not even talk about Sunday morning worship, as an individual believer, to me, it would be tiresome, because without a standard, I'm not sure day to day what I should be doing, right? Without an instruction manual, I can put something together and it may look like it's correct, but I at least need a picture as a reference to say, oh, wait a minute, wow, I put the door on upside down. Because what if in my mind that was intuitive to me, but the maker of said product will say, Ellis, this was not how it was created, its intention, its design. This isn't its thesis. This isn't its conclusion. This isn't its purpose. See? So therefore, the creator is what is brought into this equation, right? Ellis can live a life. Now, notice I said a life, right? A life will be lived, short or long, but the creator will weigh in and say, Ellis, you did or did not live towards your purpose, your thesis, your conclusion. You didn't live, or you did live up to your duty or your destiny or how you were designed. Now, when you think of that as a positive argument, that would mean that you're tailor-made. Now, that should make you feel special, that somebody took the time to say, I'm going to build out talents and abilities and relationships and interactions throughout your life that's for you, for your best interest. Now, the Beatitudes in Jesus's earthly ministry touches on this immensely. So there's a lot of support references for this. But this is something that will encourage us, because when you're down and out, even in a bad day, you have to tap into the sum of your life of all these collective days. What if what appears to be bad in that day was on purpose for something as a positive in the tomorrow? See, so it may appear to be bad today, but what if someone was saying, I'm tailor-making your day, and this bad thing that you have no control over, I'm not purposely doing it to you. It's happening to you because of the world you live in. But what I am going to do for you is navigate you through it so that it works out for good. And that's the positive relationship that believers have with God, right? Because bad things happening to all of us, right? Whether you believe or not. The benefit of believing in this life, right? We know benefit in the life to come is being with God Almighty. Benefit in this life is multifaceted. One of those benefits, though, is the navigation assistance, right? Be able to step out of the driver's seat and have someone else drive for you. Because when you have a bad day or a series of bad days or a decade or a lifestyle, and you realize when you get out of that and you look back, that some of those bad things, if not all of them, were used for good or could have prevented you from worse things. Then you start to look at purpose a little bit different. And now if you think of, wait a minute, someone is navigating my life, not only am I grateful for that, but now I have a responsibility to that person for what they've been doing. So that's what we're talking about here. All right, our author is asking us a couple of questions that we've been looking at so far, right? What view of life is taken from 11:1 through 8? What does the writer recommend as to how life should be approached? What reason is given as to why one should begin early in life to serve God? And what's the author's final conclusion on life and living? Why is this a valid conclusion? All right, as we said, we started at the end, so we looked at 25 first, but let's go back to question 23. So let's turn to Ecclesiastes 11, and I'm going to start in verse 1 here, and just 8 quick verses here, and we're going to dive into this. Okay, cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. This is going to get very literary and poetic. Give a serving to 7 and always also to 8, for you do not know what evil will be on the earth. Life lesson. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves upon the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it shall lie. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. And also, as you do not know what is the way of the wind, or how the bones grow in the womb of her who is with child, so you do not know the works of God who makes everything, right? In the morning, sow your seed, and in the evening, do not withhold your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, either this or that, or whether both alike will be good. Truly, the light is sweet, and it is pleasant for the eyes to behold the sun. But if a man lives many years and rejoices in them all, yet let him remember the days of darkness, for they will be many, and that is coming. All that is coming is vanity. All right, there's a couple of life lessons here. It sounds like he's talking about farming, but this is poetic, and there's aspects that we need to grab hold of. There's some natural orders of things for law that happen in the nature world that it doesn't matter if we're around or believe them or not. It just happens. And this is why, as we're diving into this, the author is asking us in our class, what view of life is taken from this, right? What can we get from this? That's really what we're looking at as we are rereading and diving into this. What can we get from this? And what does the author Solomon recommend as to how life should be approached, right? What can we get from this? And how should we approach life based off of this, right? I don't know anything about farming. He's talking about rain and clouds and trees, right? But is that all he's talking about? So these are reference points for us to live practically, right? The first 2 verses is much how society talks about debit, credit, purchasing, saving, short-term and long-term, and basically your finances and benevolence. That's really what verses 1 and 2 is talking about. Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a serving to 7 and also to 8, for you do not know what evil will be on the earth, right? As good as life could be going today or bad, we don't know what will happen tomorrow. Could be more good, more bad, or it can be the reverse. If you're in good, it could be bad times. If you're in bad, it could be in good times. Since we don't know, you plan, right? If you fail to plan, you're planning to fail, right? So you have to have a plan, no matter where you are in life. That's why I was started the class talking about the end of this year. What's your plan for 2022? If you wait till January 1st, you're already too late. You need to make your plan now. In Q4, you need to be planning in for Q1, right? And that's the important thing that we need to look at, right? So what's your plan? What's your goal? What is your reference point for your plan for your relationship with God Almighty? You, just talking to you. What's your plan right now? He's giving you some plan items. Basically, you need to prepare, right? From a financial standpoint, there's value in preparation, right? We don't have time to dive into this, but there's great ways to use the Bible to support financial wellness. We don't have time this morning, but there's so many great reference points. All right, 3 through 4. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves upon the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it shall lie. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. If you pay attention to the world around you and those natural order of things, you won't have to, quote unquote, work as hard as others, because you would have already have an understanding and a synergy with those natural order of things. He's using 2 reference points, right? And this goes back to a physical. He's using this reference point of, if you observe how the wind works and the blowing, and you're talking about crops and the blowing of seeds, and if you observe the clouds And after a while, you can tell without watching the television when it's going to rain and when it's not going to rain. You won't really have to do as much work, physical work, as other farmers, because you'd be in tune with your surroundings, which in this instance is nature. Now, think about that for a second, because farming as a vocation, your interaction with the nature realm is critical, right? So you'll be in tune with that sector in which you're working in. Now, broaden this out into the secular world, whatever job you have, right? Even if you're a homemaker, how in tune are you with your job? Not your employer. I'm talking about your job, your sector, what you're doing, right? So when you're in tune and you can figure out those reference points from time past, whether in your own experience or others' experiences, then you can be blessed to be able to navigate through your ladder of success in whatever sector you're in, even in the home, faster than others in the same position as you. That's what he's talking about, right? There's a reference here to even work. Now, this isn't surprising for the class because he's mentioned daily work so many times, right, throughout Ecclesiastes. So this is not something foreign to our class in recent months, but it is something interesting because we don't normally look at biblical references for finances and everyday work, but we do the Bible a disservice when we don't try to apply the Bible, which is good, to our everyday life. And this is one of those instances where we encourage you to not leave that out. How you work is important, right? You don't want to be a bad employee. You want to be a good employee. You want to do everything to your best and give honor and praise and glory to God. And you want to work smarter, not harder, right? So you want to focus on those things that will help you and bless you to navigate through life more effectively. His argument is these things are all around you. And Romans supports this. God's invisible attributes, his imprint is everywhere. Don't be so busy to miss a sunrise. Don't be so busy to miss a sunset. Don't be so busy to see a child take his or her first walk, or look at an older person as they're transitioning through life, or look at the seasons change, or look at a rainbow, or any of these things in this physical world. Don't be too busy to capture these moments, because if you do, you'll find yourself navigating through life more harder than smarter. And someone may say, how? That has nothing to do with my everyday life. Solomon would disagree. It's a mindset, right? If you put your mindset on spiritual things, remember, then your physical interactions will come into play. If your mindset is only on physical things, we spent several classes talking about this, you'll be out of your character, which is out of your design. And that's something that he's just reiterating here. All right, verses 5-6. As you do not know what is the way of the wind, or how the bones grow in the womb of her who is with child. Then he gives so many examples. You don't know the works of God who makes everything. You don't know how God does what he does. We don't even know every aspect of why he does what he does. But none of those things are prerequisites for obedience or compliance. Right? Knowing, we talked about this, I believe, last two classes. Knowing the why is not necessary to doing something, right? We talked about it in the reference of parenting, right? A child can ask why, but doesn't have to have an answer and say, well, because I didn't get an answer, I'm not going to do it, right? We talked about that in our physical households, that doesn't work. So he's reiterating that concept from a spiritual standpoint. God knows everything. You have to admit you don't know how the bones grow in the womb. You don't know how the wind is blowing. Now, people may say, no, this is old fashioned. We have doctors, scientists, and meteorologists. Again, you don't know how the bones are growing in the womb, and you don't know how the wind is blowing. If you tell me that a meteorologist in 2021 has been giving you 100% accuracy, I'm going to fall asleep in the Bible class instantly, right? If you tell me that a doctor or scientist able to navigate the human body with 100% accuracy with no question, I'm going to fall asleep, right? We know to be true that these things, even the smartest minds are still working through. And we know from biblical standpoint that God is above all. So this is important for us to remember, because what is it doing is putting our focus back onto that standard. I have a responsibility to a standard that is greater than myself. Right. And now I have to give honor and praise. I have to fear God because that standard is greater than me. I can't disrespect the standard by assuming that my knowledge is equal to the standard's knowledge. And that's just not going to work. He's telling us, here's two examples when you know you're not able to understand what that standard is able to understand naturally. Remember, we just quoted from Genesis and John, the world was formed just by words, right? We can't even sometimes form a sentence, and the whole world was formed by words, right? So like, again, it's clear that we and God are not the same. He literally spoke the world that you woke up to this morning into existence, right? So this is something to understand in terms of the difference here. Okay, then we're looking at verses 7 and 8. Truly the light is sweet and it is pleasant for the eyes to behold the sun. Remember, I was talking about enjoying those physical things around you. Don't miss going to the beach and watching the waves hit the sand, or looking at the mountaintops or the valley or the plain, right? Don't miss these opportunities. But if a man lives many years and rejoices in them all, yet let him remember the days of darkness, for they will be many. All that is coming is vanity. Even if you have a good life, right? We don't spend that much time in Bible study talking about this part. But even if you have a good life, he's telling you be prepared, right? Because it's not going to last 100%, because bad things happen to everybody. Common ground again. Right. So notice he started off with common ground. He talked about examples to bring the common ground to understanding. And then he's concluding in common ground again. Right. So these are some tools that we can grab. And the author is saying, well, what view is taken from here? Well, hopefully, as we broke these things down, we can see that the focal point is what matters. Right. I can only focus on one thing. I have to seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, according to Matthew. Then all these other things, it sounds like, will be added to us, right? And notice we're nowhere near the book of Matthew. We're just in Ecclesiastes, but it sounds much like that, right? It sounds like if you're in tune with the physical world around you, if you're in tune with the spiritual world around you, if you put God in his proper reverence and respect in your life and order and put him first, it looks like you would work smarter, not harder. It looks like you'd be prepared for bad times. And it looks like even if you have a lot of great days in this life, whether pre or post belief, you still should prepare because rain is coming to all. That's what it sounds like is giving as instruction in these 8 verses, right? Now that don't gloss over how important that is or valuable that is. Right? Because you may say, well, I read Ecclesiastes, or I read this, or I know about this, but this is life altering and life changing, because this is not widely accepted or known. But if you can change the way you view the physical world, if you can change the way you view the spiritual world, I'm not talking about individuals as a collective, but just one-on-one, you will be able to navigate better through life. Now, you either believe that or you don't believe that. Again, if you change the way you look at the physical world, if you change the way you look at the spiritual world, you'll be more effectively able to navigate through life smarter, not harder. This is solely on a belief system. You either have to buy into that or not. And he's giving you reasons on why you need to buy in it, because don't forget, who are you? Not disrespectfully, but who are you in terms of comparing to God, right? God can do all things and we can barely get ourselves up out of the bed. So this is just giving us an approach to look at life from the proper perspective, right? This is the beginning of this month. We're at the last quarter and the last month of the year. Put your life in his proper perspective, right? Who are you in comparison to God? Are you giving God his proper place in your life? If the answer is no, work on it, change it. If the answer is yes, what areas of improvement can you make in your personal relationship? That's all we're discussing today. Is very personal and a relationship driven Bible study, right? What can you do to either have a good relationship with God, or what can you do to have a better one? All right, question 24. What reason is given as to why one should begin early in life to serve God? Now, this is a great portion of scripture. If you look at verse 9 of chapter 11, and moreover, because the preacher was wise, he still taught the knowledge. Yes, he pondered and sought out and set in order many proverbs. The preacher sought to find acceptable words, and what was written was upright words of truth. The truth of the wise are like goads, and the words of scholars are like well-driven nails given by one shepherd. And further, my son, be admonished by these. Of making many books, there is no end, and much study is wearisome to the flesh. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter, right? So the preacher is giving us some instructions that we have to grab hold of, right? We have an advantage when we're younger. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes, but know that for all of these, God will bring you into judgment. Therefore, remove sorrow from your heart. Put away evil from your flesh, for childhood and youth are vanity. There's a time and a place for childhood. There's a time and a place for youth. But you're older more than you're younger if you live past probably your 30s, because the world that we live in only really consider you as a kid up until 18. And then really, to be honest with you, they only want to consider you young from 18 to about 25, right? Some industries and sectors, 25 is old. Some athletic programs, 21 is old, right? We think, what are you talking about? 21 is almost a baby if you're a certain age. But in some business sectors, right, some parts of society, look how society looks at young and old. We use those two words so with broad strokes, but what ages are they touching? Right? Like if you live to be 40, were you younger longer than you were older, or older than you were younger? Because keep in mind, kids is in a category, right? A kid is up to 18. Now you may think you're an adult, but adults look at you as a child. So that means that is just youthfulness, childhoodness, right? So that is not weighted in terms of your being young. When we say young as a society, it's different than like child or youth, right? Or kids. Young is like, okay, I'm in my prime. So 18 to, I would say, mid 20s. And then once you get past mid 20s, things start to be viewed different in society. We're not even talking about church, just society, right? So if you live to be 40 or 50 or 60, look what he's saying, right? Like, look what he's talking about in terms of reference point. Hey, childhoodness and youthfulness is fleeting, right? It's just vanity. You need to remember the Creator in your youth, because you only have a short time in being youthful. Then now we're in chapter 12, right? Difficult days are going to come, and you're going to be like, now I don't even have pleasure in the day anymore. Now, remember when you used to have something big to do, whether it's an event or first day of school, you lay your clothes out on the bed. You don't even think about where you're going to sleep. Sometimes you sleep on top of the bed with the clothes, and you don't even roll over. You don't even get good sleep because you don't want to wrinkle your clothes, right? Like that's from a young mindset with something to do. When you get older and you wake up, you look at the day a little bit different depending on your mindset. And that's what he's talking about. You get to the point where you will no longer have pleasure in the day, right? And and now we're in chapter 12, verse 2 through 8. He's going to use a lot of literary license and metaphors and similes to describe the deterioration of the human body. That's what he's talking about in verses 2 through 8. And it's very poetic, and it's very profound, because he's going to use natural elements like the sun and the moon and the stars. And he's going to talk about those trees and seasons and animals. And he's going to talk about them as a personification and as also an application to our physical bodies, right? So he started talking about silver cords and gold bowls that are broken and pitchers that are shattered at the fountain. And what you need to be thinking about is different deterioration of the body and the mind, right? Dementia, Alzheimer's, right? Different areas of the body that no longer function the same way as they did when you were younger. This is life, right? Hollywood won't spend much time on this. And we don't want to think about this much, but this is a part of life too. Death is a part of life, just like birth is, right? Good things are a part of life, and so are the bad things though. So you have to look at it as a whole. And see, when you look at it as a whole, which is what the author been trying to do this whole time in Ecclesiastes, that's why you say this was just vanity. Because when you look at it as a whole, you say that time that I spent in that time period of my life, if it wasn't something that benefited me in the present, I can say that that wasn't a good use of my time. But if you were in that time period of youthfulness and you're only thinking in today, you will discount that and say, no, today is what matters. But if you live long enough, you'll say, look, I don't even have to read the rest of this chapter 12 because I'm already on board. This guy is talking truth. He's talking about the progression of life and not looking at life as a snapshot and instead looking at it as a whole. Now, in conclusion to class, in this chapter of Ecclesiastes, not just 12, but this part of our book, if you can grab hold of that mindset as a young person, not an older person, meaning if you can think as a young person as the whole of your life, it will change your decision making because you would stop making short-term decisions and think long-term. That is a blessing outside of spiritual things. It's also a blessing in terms of physical things. So again, this is not just spiritual, it's also physical, it's financial, your health. There's so many aspects of this that are impacted by this, right? So if you eat well, you finance well, you think well, you're emotionally well in the short term, and think about long-term effects of what you're doing, right? If you create a health and wellness lifestyle for yourself, for your finances, for your emotional state, and for your physical body, if you do those things as a young person, the value when you get older is immense. If you can see that from the physical three things I named, how much more from the spiritual? That's what he's saying. If as a young person, you can focus on the totality of your life instead of every day, it will change your short-term decision-making that will impact your long-term life. And he's saying every aspect of your life until you pass from this life to the next, think about that daily. Think about the growth and the opportunity of tomorrow by making great plans for today instead of thinking of the folly and the youthfulness of today, right? So that's what he was talking about in these 12 chapters. It's something that we encourage you to wrestle with, to think about, to ponder, to write down, do an inventory of your life and see areas of improvement and work towards these goals. Okay, if you have any questions about Ecclesiastes, please let us know. This is a great book for additional study. So we just wanted to spend some time in today's class concluding it properly. But don't feel like you can't talk about this more. We can have great breakout sessions about this. We're going to transition into a new book next week. So be prepared for that. We'll have some most likely sheets on the back for those. So just be prepared for that. But you can go ahead and start reading Song of Solomon in preparation for that as we move on towards next week, if we live and it be God's will. All right. We'll take a break for the next few minutes, gather ourselves collectively, those who are at the building and remotely as well, and then we'll transition into our worship service. So we're thankful for everyone's attention and participation, and we ask that you give us a few moments as we transition into worship.